My name is Sarah Chen, and I never expected to inherit anything from my great-aunt Margaret. Hell, I didn't even know she existed until 3 days ago when a lawyer called me at my cramped studio apartment in Queens, New York. Ms. Chen, this is Robert Hartley from Hartley & Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of Margaret Whitmore. You've been named as a beneficiary. I nearly dropped my phone. Margaret Whitmore. The name meant nothing to me. My mother had always been secretive about her family, deflecting questions with vague answers and quick subject changes. Growing up in our modest 2-bedroom house in Flushing, money was always tight. Mom worked double shifts at the hospital as a nurse, and I learned early that asking about relatives was a conversation stopper. I think you have the wrong person, I told the lawyer, stirring my instant ramen with one hand while balancing the phone with the other. I don't know anyone named Margaret Whitmore. Ms. Chen, I have your mother's maiden name here as Whitmore. Margaret was her aunt, your great-aunt. She passed away last week, and the funeral is tomorrow at Riverside Memorial Chapel on the Upper East Side. The reading of the will follows immediately after. The Upper East Side. Even the address screamed money, a world away from my reality of student loans, gig economy jobs, and dreams of making it as a freelance graphic designer that seemed more distant by the day. I called my mother immediately. She was at work, and I could hear the beeping of hospital machines in the background. Mom, did you know about a great-aunt named Margaret? The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, she spoke, her voice carefully controlled. Where did you hear that name? A lawyer called. She died, and apparently I'm in her will. Another pause. Sarah, honey, some family history is better left buried. That woman, she made choices that hurt a lot of people. Don't go to that funeral. But I was 26, barely scraping by in one of the most expensive cities in the world, and someone I'd never met had remembered me in their will. My curiosity won over my mother's warnings. The funeral was everything I'd expected from the Upper East Side. Elegant, expensive, and full of people who looked like they'd stepped out of a Ralph Lauren catalog. I stood in the back of the chapel wearing my only black dress, the one I'd bought for job interviews, feeling like an imposter among the sea of designer suits and pearls. The chapel was packed, but something felt off. The energy was cold, almost hostile. I watched faces during the service, expecting to see grief, but instead I saw tension, anger, and something that looked like fear. The eulogy was delivered by a stern-faced man in his 60s who spoke about Margaret's complicated legacy and difficult decisions. Not exactly the warm remembrance you'd expect for someone who'd clearly been wealthy and important. As the service ended, I tried to approach a few people, hoping to learn something about my great-aunt, maybe understand why my mother had kept her existence a secret. But the moment I introduced myself, their faces changed. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Some people actually walked away. "Excuse me," I said to an elderly woman with silver hair and a face that could have been carved from marble. "I'm Sarah Chen. I think Margaret was my great-aunt." The woman's eyes widened, and she clutched her purse tighter. "Chen, are you Helen's daughter?" "Yes, Helen's my mother." "Did you know?" "I have nothing to say to you." She turned and walked away so quickly, her heels clicked against the marble floor like a typewriter. This scene repeated itself over and over. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit looked at me like I was carrying a disease. A woman about my mother's age actually crossed herself when she heard my name. By the time we moved to the lawyer's office for the will reading, I was convinced I'd made a terrible mistake coming here. Hartley & Associates occupied an entire floor of a building that probably cost more per month than I made in a year. The conference room was intimidating, all dark wood and leather chairs that probably cost more than my car. About 20 people were seated around a massive table, and the moment I walked in, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I recognized some faces from the funeral. There was the silver-haired woman who'd walked away from me, several people who looked like they could be Margaret's contemporaries, and a handful of younger people who had the unmistakable look of inherited wealth, that particular combination of entitlement and boredom that comes from never having to worry about money. Robert Hartley was exactly what central casting would order for a high-end estate lawyer. Silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of confidence that comes from handling other people's millions. He had 2 documents in front of him, which seemed odd, but I was too nervous to think much about it. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being heard. "We're here for the reading of Margaret Whitmore's last will and testament. He lifted the first document, and I noticed several people lean forward expectantly. These people clearly knew each other, clearly had expectations about what they'd hear. I was the only one who looked lost. Margaret Whitmore's will, dated March 15, 2024, is quite straightforward, Hartley continued. The bulk of her estate, valued at approximately $12 million, including her property at 847 Fifth Avenue, her home in the Hamptons, and her various investments, is to be distributed among her nephews and nieces. I watched the faces around the table. There were nods of satisfaction, a few tight smiles. This was what they'd expected to hear. To my nephew James Whitmore, I leave $2 million and my collection of rare books. To my niece, Patricia Whitmore Hayes, I leave $2 million and my jewelry collection. To my nephew Robert Whitmore, I leave $2 million and my art collection. The list continued. Each person was receiving substantial sums, some getting property, others getting valuable collections. I started to feel foolish. Why had I been asked to come here? Maybe I was getting some token amount, a few $1,000s that would help with my student loans but wouldn't change my life. And to Sarah Chen, Hartley's voice seemed to get louder, I leave my personal papers and the contents of my safe deposit box, with instructions that she is to receive these items privately after this meeting. That was it? Papers and whatever was in a safe deposit box? I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. The looks I was getting from around the table ranged from curious to contemptuous. I was clearly the charity case, the distant relation who got the leftovers. But then I noticed something odd. Robert Hartley was still holding the second document, and he kept glancing at his watch. Several people started to stand, ready to leave, but he held up his hand. If you'll excuse me, there's one more matter to attend to. I need to meet privately with Ms. Chen regarding the personal papers mentioned in the will. The room emptied quickly after that. I caught fragments of conversation as people filed out, and none of it was friendly. Can't believe she had the nerve to show up. Helen's daughter, of all people. Margaret always was vindictive. Soon, it was just me and Robert Hartley in the vast conference room. He waited until he heard the elevator doors close before speaking. Ms. Chen, what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to understand, but I need you to listen carefully. He lifted the second document. What we just read was Margaret's public will, dated March 15, 2024. This document, he held up the second paper, is her private will, dated March 16, 2024, one day later. My heart started beating faster. I don't understand. Margaret Whitmore was a very intelligent woman, and she knew her family well. She suspected that her death would bring out the worst in people, and she was right. She created two wills. The first, which we just read, is what she wanted everyone to believe. The second contains her true intentions. He slid the document across the table to me. My hands shook as I picked it up. Margaret Whitmore's true last will and testament, I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. Being of sound mind and body, I hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils. Keep reading, Hartley said gently. I leave my entire estate, valued at approximately $12 million, including all properties, investments, and personal belongings, to my great-niece, Sarah Chen, daughter of Helen Whitmore Chen. The words swam in front of my eyes. I read the paragraph 3 times before it sank in. $12 million. To me, everything. This can't be real, I whispered. I assure you it's completely legal and valid. Margaret was very specific about her wishes. She also left you a letter, which explains her reasoning. He handed me an envelope with my name written in elegant script. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely open it. Dear Sarah, the letter began, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've just discovered that your life is about to change dramatically. I know you don't know me, and I know your mother probably tried to keep you away from this family. She was trying to protect you, and she was right to do so. I've been watching you from afar for years. I know about your struggles, your dreams, your character. I know you work 3 jobs while trying to build your design business. I know you send money to your mother even though you can barely afford rent. I know you volunteer at the animal shelter on weekends because you believe in helping creatures who can't help themselves. The people who were in that room today, my nephews and nieces, they are not good people, Sarah. They are greedy, cruel, and they have spent years waiting for me to die so they could inherit my money. They don't need it. They already have family money. They want it because they believe they deserve it, because they think family money should stay with family. But family isn't about blood, Sarah. It's about character. It's about doing the right thing even when it's difficult. It's about treating people with kindness and respect, regardless of their circumstances. I am leaving you my fortune not because you're family, but because you're the only member of this family who deserves it. You've earned it through your character, your work ethic, and your kindness. The money comes with a responsibility. There are people who depend on the charitable foundation I established, and I trust you to continue that work. There are also people who will try to take this inheritance from you. They will claim fraud. They will contest the will. They will try to destroy you to get what they think is theirs. Don't let them. You deserve this chance at a better life. You deserve to pursue your dreams without worrying about rent or student loans. You deserve to help your mother retire from those double shifts. But more than that, you deserve to know that someone believed in you. Someone saw your worth and wanted to give you the opportunity to shine. Use this gift wisely, Sarah. And remember, sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. With love and respect, your great-aunt Margaret. I set the letter down and stared at Robert Hartley. $12 million? $12 million, he confirmed. Plus the properties, the investments, the art collection, everything. But those people, they think they're inheriting all of this. They are going to be very, very angry when they find out the truth. Margaret was right about one thing. They will fight this. They'll claim undue influence, fraud, anything they can think of. But the will is ironclad. I helped Margaret draft it myself, and I made sure it would stand up to any challenge. I thought about the hostile faces in the chapel, the way people had looked at me like I was contaminated. They already hate me, and they don't even know yet. Margaret anticipated this. She set aside money for your legal defense, and she chose me specifically because I've never lost a will contest. She also left detailed instructions about what to do when the family finds out. What kind of instructions? She wanted you to be prepared. She wanted you to understand what you're up against. The Whitmores are old money, Sarah. They've been wealthy for generations, and they believe that gives them certain rights. They think they can intimidate you into giving up your inheritance. Can they? Not legally, but they can make your life very difficult. They have resources, connections, and they're not above using them to get what they want. I thought about my mother's warnings, her insistence that some family history was better left buried. What did Margaret do that hurt so many people? She told the truth, Robert said simply. About 25 years ago, there was a family scandal. Margaret's brother, your grandmother's brother, was involved in some very shady business dealings. He was stealing from the family trust, embezzling money from the foundation, and generally behaving like a criminal. Margaret exposed him. That's why they hate her? That's why they hate her. And that's why they'll hate you. Because you're getting the money they think should have stayed in the family, and you're a reminder of why it didn't. I sat in that expensive conference room, holding a letter from a woman I'd never met, learning that I was suddenly worth $12 million, and all I could think about was my mother working double shifts at the hospital because she couldn't afford to retire. What happens now? I asked. Now you go home and you think about what you want to do with your life. I'll handle the legal paperwork, the transfer of assets, all of that. But Sarah, his voice became serious, you need to be prepared for war, because that's what this is going to be. I left that building, feeling like I was in a dream. $12 million. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having, more than I'd ever imagined anyone I knew having. It was enough to change everything. My life, my mother's life, the lives of people I cared about. But as I walked down Fifth Avenue, past the building that apparently now belonged to me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And I couldn't stop thinking about the hostile faces at the funeral, the way people had looked at me like I was the enemy. Margaret's letter had warned me that the family would fight. But as I hailed a taxi to take me back to Queens, back to my tiny studio apartment where I'd spent the morning eating instant ramen, I wondered if I was strong enough for the battle that was coming. Because one thing was clear, the Whitmores weren't going to let me walk away with their money without a fight, and I had a feeling that fight was going to be uglier than anything I'd ever experienced. The taxi pulled up to my building, and I paid the driver with the last $20 bill in my wallet. Tomorrow, apparently, I'd be worth $12 million. Tonight, I was still just Sarah Chen from Queens, trying to figure out how my life had just changed forever. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I made a decision. I was going to fight for this inheritance, not just for the money, but for Margaret. She'd believed in me when no one else did. She'd seen something in me that even I didn't know was there. The Whitmores wanted a war. They were going to get one. The war started at 6 a.m. the next morning with a phone call that nearly gave me a heart attack. Sarah Chen? The voice was crisp, professional, and completely unfamiliar. Yes, I mumbled, still half asleep in my tiny studio apartment. This is Patricia Whitmore Hayes. I believe we met yesterday at my aunt's funeral. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. Patricia was the silver-haired woman who'd walked away from me at the chapel, the one who was supposed to inherit $2 million and Margaret's jewelry collection, according to the fake will. Mrs. Whitmore Hayes, how did you get my number? That's not important. Her voice was cold as winter. What's important is that we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding about my aunt's estate, and I believe you may have been given some incorrect information. My heart started pounding. They knew. Somehow they'd found out about the real will. I don't know what you mean, I said, buying time. Don't play games with me, young lady. I know exactly what Margaret did, and I know exactly what you think you're going to inherit. I'm calling to offer you a way out of this mess before it destroys your life. I don't think I should be talking to you about this. Oh, but you should, because what I'm about to tell you could save you from making the biggest mistake of your life. Her voice took on a tone that probably worked great for intimidating hotel staff and restaurant servers. My aunt was not mentally competent when she made her alternative arrangements. We have medical records, psychiatric evaluations, and witness testimony that will prove she was suffering from dementia and depression. That's not true. I don't know why I said it. I had no idea if it was true or not, but something in her tone made me want to fight back. Isn't it? A woman who cuts her own family out of her will to leave everything to a stranger she's never met. A woman who creates elaborate schemes involving fake wills and secret documents. That sounds like the behavior of someone who was clearly not in her right mind. I could hear the confidence in her voice, the certainty that she was going to win this fight, but I could also hear something else, desperation. If they were so sure they could prove Margaret was incompetent, why were they calling me at 6 a.m. to negotiate? What do you want, Mrs. Whitmore Hayes? I want to save you from a lengthy, expensive, and ultimately unsuccessful legal battle. I want to offer you a settlement that will leave you comfortable while allowing my aunt's estate to be distributed according to her true wishes. How much? $500,000. Cash. No taxes, no legal fees, no years of court battles. You sign a document relinquishing all claims to the estate, and we'll wire the money to your account today. $500,000. 6 months ago, that would have seemed like an impossible fortune. It was more money than I'd earn in 10 years at my current income level. It was enough to pay off my student loans, help my mother retire, maybe even start my own design firm. But it wasn't $12 million, and it wasn't what Margaret had wanted. I need to think about it. You have until noon today. After that, the offer expires, and we proceed with the legal challenge. And Sarah, I should mention that we've already spoken to your mother. She's very concerned about the position you're putting yourself in. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my hands shaking. They'd called my mother. They'd involved her in this. I immediately dialed her number. Mom, did someone call you this morning? Sarah, honey, yes. A woman named Patricia something. She said you were about to make a terrible mistake, that you were going to lose a lot of money trying to fight for some inheritance. What did you tell her? I told her I didn't know what she was talking about. But Sarah, what is going on? Yesterday you said Margaret left you something in her will, but this woman made it sound like you think you're inheriting millions of dollars. I closed my eyes. I hadn't told my mother about the real will yet. I hadn't told anyone. Robert Hartley had advised me to keep it quiet until we had all the paperwork in order. Mom, can you come over? I need to explain something, and I need to do it in person. 2 hours later, my mother sat in my tiny kitchen, her nurse's uniform rumpled from the night shift, staring at me like I'd just told her I was moving to Mars. $12 million, she said for the third time. $12 million, I confirmed. And they're offering you $500,000 to walk away. $500,000! She was quiet for a long time, staring at Margaret's letter, which I'd finally shown her. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. Sarah, I need to tell you something about why I kept Margaret a secret from you. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because you're about to fight these people, and you need to understand what you're up against. She took a deep breath. Margaret wasn't just my aunt. She was like a second mother to me. When I was growing up, She was the one who encouraged me to become a nurse, who helped pay for my education, who supported me when I married your father against the family's wishes. Against the family's wishes? Your father was Chinese American, Sarah. This was the 1990s, and the Whitmores were, well, they were very traditional about some things. They didn't approve of interracial marriage, especially not for someone they considered part of the family legacy. My mother rarely talked about my father, who had died when I was 5. I knew he'd been a good man, a teacher, but I'd never known there had been family drama around their marriage. When your father died, I was devastated. I had a 5-year-old daughter, a mountain of medical bills, and no idea how I was going to survive. Margaret offered to help. She wanted to pay for everything, send you to private school, make sure we never had to worry about money. What happened? The family found out. They told Margaret that if she helped me, they would cut her off completely. They would contest any will that left her money to non-family members. They would make her life miserable. My mother's voice was bitter. So Margaret made a choice. She publicly distanced herself from me to protect her ability to help other people through her foundation. But she never stopped watching over us. What do you mean? That scholarship you got for community college? Margaret arranged it. The anonymous benefactor who paid for your art supplies in high school? Margaret? The reason you were able to transfer to a 4-year school despite our financial situation? Margaret pulled strings, made donations, opened doors. I felt like the world was tilting. You knew? All this time you knew she was helping us? I suspected. Margaret was careful, but not careful enough. She wanted to make sure you had opportunities, Sarah. She wanted to make sure you could become the person she knew you could be. But why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid. Afraid that if the family found out she was still helping us, they would make her stop. Afraid that if you knew about the money, it would change how you saw yourself, how hard you worked. She reached across the table and took my hand. I was wrong. I should have told you. I should have let you know that someone believed in you that much. My phone rang. Robert Hartley. Sarah, we have a problem. The Whitmores have filed an emergency motion to freeze the estate pending a competency hearing. They're also requesting a full psychiatric evaluation of Margaret's mental state at the time she wrote the will. Can they do that? They can try. I'll be filing counter motions, but this is going to get messy fast. There's something else. They've hired Cromwell and Associates. Should I know that name? They're the most expensive, most ruthless estate litigation firm in the city. They specialize in destroying people who challenge old money families. Sarah, they're not just trying to get the money back. They're trying to destroy your credibility, your reputation, your life. What do you mean? They're going to investigate everything about you. Your finances, your relationships, your social media posts from 10 years ago. They're going to try to paint you as someone who manipulated a vulnerable old woman. They're going to dig into your mother's past, your father's past, looking for anything they can use against you. I looked at my mother, who was listening to my side of the conversation with growing concern. And if they can't find anything, they'll make something up. These people have resources, Sarah. They have private investigators, they have connections in the media, they have ways of making your life very difficult. So what do? You fight. We have the law on our side, and we have Margaret's detailed documentation of her decision-making process. She knew this was coming, and she prepared for it. But Sarah, you need to understand, this is going to be a long, expensive, ugly battle. These people are going to try to break you. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen with my mother, staring at the letter from Margaret. $500,000 or $12 million. A guaranteed payout or a fight that could destroy my life. What should I do, Mom? What does your heart tell you? That Margaret trusted me with this for a reason. That she believed in me when nobody else did. That I owe it to her to fight. And what does your head tell you? That I'm a broke graphic designer from Queens who's about to go to war with some of the most powerful people in New York City. My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she smiled. The first real smile I'd seen from her in months. Do you know what I see when I look at you, Sarah? What? I see a woman who works 3 jobs and still finds time to volunteer at the animal shelter. I see someone who sends me money even when she can barely afford rent. I see someone who has never given up on her dreams, even when everything seemed impossible. Mom, I see Margaret's niece, not just by blood, but by character. She saw something in you that even I didn't fully understand until now. She saw someone who deserved a chance to change the world. You think I should fight? I think you should do what you know is right. and I think Margaret knew exactly what kind of person she was trusting with her legacy. At 11:30 a.m., Patricia Whitmore Hayes called back. "Have you made your decision, Sarah?" "Yes, I have. And? I'm going to honor Margaret's wishes. I'm going to fight for her legacy, and I'm going to make sure her foundation continues to help people who need it." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When Patricia finally spoke, her voice was pure ice. "You have no idea what you've just done to yourself. Maybe not, but I know what I haven't done. I haven't betrayed someone who believed in me. You'll regret this, Sarah. I promise you that. Maybe. But I'd regret taking your money and walking away a lot more." The line went dead. Within an hour, my phone was ringing with calls from reporters. Someone had leaked the story to the press, and suddenly, I was the mystery heiress who was stealing money from a grieving family. By evening, there were photographers outside my apartment building. My social media accounts were flooded with messages ranging from congratulations to death threats. Someone had posted my address online, and strangers were showing up at my door, demanding to know if the stories were true. I was packing a bag to stay at my mother's house when Robert Hartley called again. "Sarah, are you watching the news?" "No, I'm trying to escape the reporters." "Turn on Channel 7. I grabbed my laptop and found the news stream. There was Patricia Whitmore Hayes, perfectly coiffed and dressed in expensive black, standing in front of what looked like a law office. "This is a heartbreaking situation," she was saying to the reporter. "My aunt was a wonderful woman who suffered from severe depression and dementia in her final years. She was taken advantage of by people who saw her vulnerability as an opportunity." The reporter nodded sympathetically. "Do you believe Sarah Chen manipulated your aunt?" "I believe my aunt was not in her right mind when she made this will. We have medical documentation proving that she was suffering from severe mental illness. This young woman may have convinced herself that she deserves this money, but she's taking resources away from family members who loved and cared for Margaret for decades." "And what about the allegations that Ms. Chen never even met your aunt?" "That's correct. She's a complete stranger who somehow convinced a sick, elderly woman to leave her everything. It's elder abuse, plain and simple." The news report cut to a photo of me, looking confused and disheveled, apparently taken by one of the photographers outside my building. The contrast with Patricia's polished appearance was stark. "This is just the beginning," Robert said when I muted the stream. "Tomorrow, they'll have private investigators digging through your garbage, reporters calling your friends, and lawyers filing motions to paint you as a gold digger who preyed on a vulnerable old woman. But it's not true. The truth doesn't matter in a media war, Sarah. What matters is who tells the most compelling story. And right now, their story is that you're a greedy stranger who manipulated a sick old woman." I looked around my tiny apartment, at the stack of bills on my kitchen counter, at the 3 jobs worth of work clothes hanging in my closet. In 24 hours, I'd gone from being invisible to being the most hated person in New York City. "Robert, what have I gotten myself into?" "You've gotten yourself into exactly what Margaret expected you to get yourself into. And she left you the tools to fight back." "What tools?" "Tomorrow, you're going to see just how well your great-aunt knew her family. And you're going to understand why she chose you to be her heir." As I turned off the lights in my apartment and prepared to sneak out the back entrance to avoid the reporters, I thought about Margaret's letter. She'd warned me that the family would try to destroy me. She'd also said that I deserved this chance at a better life. The question was whether I was strong enough to survive what was coming. Because Patricia Whitmore Hayes had made one thing clear. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about whether I had the courage to stand up to people who thought they could buy and sell anyone who got in their way. Tomorrow, I was going to find out if Margaret had been right about me. Tomorrow, I was going to discover if I really deserved the faith she'd placed in me. The war for Margaret's legacy was just beginning. The next morning, I woke up on my mother's couch to find my face on the front page of the New York Post. The headline read, "Mystery Heiress or Gold Digger." The photo was the same unflattering one from the news, but blown up to show every detail of my confused expression. "Sarah, honey, don't look at that," my mother said, trying to pull the newspaper away. Too late. I read the article, which painted me as a manipulative stranger who had somehow convinced a beloved society matriarch to leave me her fortune. They'd even managed to find someone who claimed to be my former employer, saying I'd been manipulative and dishonest at work, except I'd never worked for the company they mentioned. "They're making things up," I said, showing the article to my mother. Of course they are. The question is, what are you going to do about it? My phone rang. Robert Hartley again. Sarah, I need you to come to my office immediately and wear something professional. We're going to be making a statement to the press. I thought you said we shouldn't talk to the media. That was before they started lying about you. Margaret left specific instructions for this situation. Trust me, she knew exactly what the family would do, and she prepared for it. An hour later, I was sitting in Robert's office wearing the same black interview dress I'd worn to the funeral, feeling like a fraud among all the expensive law books and mahogany furniture. Robert had a stack of documents in front of him that looked like it could choke a horse. Sarah, what I'm about to show you is going to change everything. But first, I need you to understand something about your great-aunt. Margaret Whitmore wasn't just wealthy, she was brilliant. She had a degree in psychology from Columbia, and she understood people better than anyone I've ever met. What do you mean? She knew her family would claim she was mentally incompetent, so she documented everything. He opened the first folder. For the past 2 years, Margaret underwent regular psychiatric evaluations, not because she was sick, but because she wanted to prove she wasn't. He showed me a stack of reports from some of the most prestigious psychiatric institutions in the country. Every single one declared Margaret Whitmore to be of sound mind, with no signs of dementia, depression, or any other mental illness. She was evaluated every 3 months, Sarah. The last evaluation was done just 2 weeks before she died. She passed every cognitive test, every psychological assessment, every measure of mental competency. But Patricia said they had medical records proving she was sick. Patricia lied, but Margaret knew she would. He opened another folder. This is where it gets interesting. Margaret didn't just document her own mental state. She documented her family's behavior. The folder contained photographs, audio recordings, and detailed notes spanning several years. I picked up a photograph that showed a man I recognized from the funeral, one of the nephews who was supposed to inherit $2 million, talking to someone in what looked like a parking garage. What am I looking at? James Whitmore, meeting with a private investigator 3 months ago. Margaret hired her own investigators to watch her family, and what they found was illuminating. He played an audio recording. James's voice was unmistakable. I don't care what it costs. I want to know everything about the old woman's finances, her health, her daily routine. If she's showing any signs of mental decline, I want it documented, and if she's not, I want to know who we can pay to say she is. My stomach dropped. He was planning to challenge her mental competency even before she died? It gets worse. Robert played another recording, this one of Patricia's voice. The moment that old bat dies, I want her medical records sealed and our psychiatrist ready to testify. We'll say she was depressed, delusional, whatever we need to say to get that will overturned. I listened to recording after recording of Margaret's family members plotting to steal her money, discussing how to manipulate her will, even talking about ways to accelerate her timeline if she didn't die soon enough for their liking. This is evidence of conspiracy, I said, my hands shaking as I held the photographs. It's evidence of exactly what Margaret expected from her family. She knew they were circling like vultures, waiting for her to die so they could get their hands on her money. That's why she chose you, Sarah, because you were the only person connected to this family who had never asked her for anything. Robert opened yet another folder, this one containing financial records. Margaret also documented every instance of her family members asking for money, trying to manipulate her, or attempting to gain access to her accounts. The records were staggering. James had asked for loans totaling over $800,000 in the past 5 years, loans he'd never repaid. Patricia had tried to convince Margaret to sign over power of attorney for her own protection. Robert Jr. had attempted to access Margaret's safe deposit box using a forged signature. They've been trying to steal from her for years, I said, and she knew it. She also knew that the moment she died, they would claim she was incompetent and try to overturn any will that didn't give them everything they wanted. So she prepared for war. She prepared for justice. Robert smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Sarah, your great-aunt was playing chess while her family was playing checkers. Every move they've made, she anticipated. Every lie they've told, she has evidence to refute. He handed me a thick document. This is Margaret's full psychological profile, compiled by Dr. Elizabeth Harrison, one of the most respected forensic psychiatrists in the country. Dr. Harrison evaluated Margaret specifically for the purpose of will contests, and her conclusion is unambiguous. Margaret Whitmore was not only mentally competent, she was exceptionally intelligent and showed no signs of any psychological condition that would impair her judgment. What about the depression Patricia mentioned on the news? Margaret was evaluated for depression as part of the comprehensive psychological battery. She scored in the normal range for someone her age. If anything, the evaluation showed that she was unusually optimistic and forward-thinking for an 87-year-old woman. I was beginning to understand the scope of what Margaret had done. She hadn't just left me her money, she'd left me an arsenal. Robert, there's something I need to ask you. How did Margaret know about me? How did she know enough about my character to trust me with this? Robert's expression became gentle, almost paternal. Margaret hired private investigators, but not to spy on her family's criminal activities. She hired them to watch you. To watch me? For the past 5 years, Margaret has had investigators providing her with regular reports about your life. Not invasive surveillance, just observation. She knew about your jobs, your volunteer work, your struggles with money, the way you treated people. He opened one final folder, and I gasped. It contained photographs of me, working at the coffee shop, volunteering at the animal shelter, helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries, sitting with my mother at the hospital during one of her particularly difficult shifts. She was watching me. She was learning about you. Margaret told me once that you can tell everything you need to know about a person by watching how they treat others when they think nobody is looking. She watched you for 5 years, Sarah, and every single thing she saw confirmed that you were exactly the kind of person she hoped you were. I looked at the photographs, moments from my life that I'd forgotten, captured by someone who cared enough to document my character. There was a picture of me giving my umbrella to a homeless man during a rainstorm, another of me staying late at the coffee shop to help a co-worker who was struggling with a difficult customer. She saw me at my worst and still believed in me. She saw you at your most authentic, and that's why she trusted you. Robert closed the folders. Sarah, we're going to release all of this information at a press conference this afternoon. The family's lies are going to be exposed, their conspiracy is going to be revealed, and the world is going to see that Margaret Whitmore was a brilliant woman who knew exactly what she was doing. What about the estate freeze? With this evidence, the judge will lift the freeze immediately. The family's competency challenge will be dismissed with prejudice, meaning they can never file it again. And Sarah? He smiled. There's a good chance they'll be facing criminal charges for conspiracy and attempted fraud. The press conference was held at 2 p.m. in the lobby of Hartley & Associates. I stood next to Robert, wearing my interview dress and trying not to throw up from nerves while he systematically destroyed every lie the Whitmore family had told about Margaret and about me. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert began, yesterday, members of the Whitmore family made serious accusations about the mental competency of Margaret Whitmore and the legitimacy of her will. Today, we're going to present evidence that not only refutes those accusations, but reveals a years-long conspiracy by family members to defraud Margaret Whitmore of her estate. He started with the psychiatric evaluations, reading portions aloud that demonstrated Margaret's exceptional mental clarity. Then he moved to the audio recordings of the family members plotting against her. The room full of reporters was dead silent as they listened to James Whitmore talking about paying doctors to declare his aunt mentally incompetent. When Robert played Patricia's recording about sealing medical records and manufacturing evidence, several journalists actually gasped. The evidence shows conclusively that Margaret Whitmore was not only mentally competent, but that she was actively protecting herself against family members who were conspiring to steal her estate. Robert continued. The true question isn't whether Margaret was competent to make her will. It's whether her family members should be facing criminal charges for their attempted fraud. He concluded by reading excerpts from Margaret's detailed letter, explaining her decision to leave everything to me, emphasizing her 5 years of observation and her careful consideration of my character. Margaret Whitmore didn't leave her estate to Sarah Chen impulsively, or because she was mentally impaired. She left it to her because she spent years determining that Sarah was the only member of her extended family who deserved it. During the Q&A session, a reporter asked me directly, Ms. Chen, how do you respond to accusations that you manipulated your great-aunt? I looked into the cameras, thinking about Margaret's letter, about all the moments she'd witnessed of my life that I'd never known were being observed. I never met my great-aunt Margaret, but I understand now that she knew me better than I knew myself. She saw something in me that I'm still trying to live up to. I didn't manipulate her. She inspired me, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the faith she placed in me. The press conference changed everything. Within hours, the story had flipped completely. The family that had been portrayed as grieving victims were now revealed as greedy conspirators. I went from being a gold digger to being a worthy heir who had been chosen for my character. But more importantly, the legal situation changed dramatically. By 6 p.m., the estate freeze had been lifted. By the next morning, the competency challenge had been dismissed. And by the end of the week, James, Patricia, and Robert Jr. were all facing criminal investigations for conspiracy to commit fraud. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in my new office, actually Margaret's old office in the Fifth Avenue penthouse that now belonged to me, reading through the files of Margaret's charitable foundation. The foundation supported dozens of causes: scholarships for low-income students, funding for animal shelters, grants for small businesses in underserved communities, and medical research. Robert knocked on the door. "Sarah, there's someone here to see you." An elderly black woman entered, using a walker, but moving with dignity and purpose. She was well-dressed but not wealthy, and her eyes were kind but determined. "Ms. Chen, I'm Dorothy Williams. I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "My grandson Marcus was able to go to college because of a scholarship from Margaret's foundation. He's graduating next month with a degree in engineering. Without Margaret's help, he never would have had that opportunity." She showed me a photograph of a young man in a cap and gown, beaming with pride. "Margaret never got to meet Marcus, but she changed his life. And now that you're continuing her work," Dorothy's eyes filled with tears, "I just wanted you to know that what you're doing matters. There are hundreds of people like Marcus whose lives are better because of Margaret's generosity and your decision to fight for her legacy." After Dorothy left, I sat in Margaret's chair, looking out at Central Park, thinking about the responsibility I'd inherited along with the money. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Marcus and students like him. It was about the animal shelters that depended on foundation grants. It was about the small businesses that got their start with Margaret's loans. The Whitmore family had seen Margaret's money as something they deserved because of their bloodline. But Margaret had understood that money was just a tool. What mattered was how you used it to help others. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Saw the news about the foundation's latest scholarship recipients. Your great-aunt would be proud." She was right. Margaret would be proud. Not because I'd won the legal battle or inherited her fortune, but because I was using it the way she'd intended, to help people who needed help, to give opportunities to people who deserved them, to make the world a little bit better. The war for Margaret's legacy was over, but the work of honoring that legacy was just beginning. 6 months after that first phone call from Robert Hartley, I was standing in the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, hosting the Margaret Whitmore Foundation's annual scholarship gala. The room was filled with students, educators, and community leaders, people whose lives had been touched by Margaret's generosity and who were now part of her continuing legacy. I wore a simple black dress that cost more than my old monthly rent, but I'd learned that in this world, appearance mattered. Not because of vanity, but because people judged the foundation's credibility partly by how professionally it presented itself. Margaret had understood this, and now I did too. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said into the microphone, looking out at the crowd of 500 people. 6 months ago, I learned about a woman I'd never met, but who had been watching over me my entire life. Tonight, I want to tell you what I've learned about her legacy. I'd become comfortable with public speaking, something that would have terrified me a year ago, but representing Margaret's work had given me a confidence I'd never known I possessed. Margaret Whitmore didn't just leave money to people. She invested in potential. Every scholarship recipient here tonight represents her belief that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity doesn't. Our job is to bridge that gap. I introduced Marcus Williams, Dorothy's grandson, who was now working as an engineer at a sustainable energy company. His college scholarship had been just the beginning. The foundation had also helped fund his graduate studies and connected him with mentors in his field. "Without Mrs. Whitmore's foundation," Marcus said, "I would probably be working in a factory right now instead of designing solar energy systems that will power entire communities." She didn't just change my life, she gave me the tools to change other people's lives. After the formal presentations, I moved through the crowd, talking to scholarship recipients, foundation board members, and donors. These events had become my favorite part of running the foundation, seeing the direct impact of Margaret's vision. "Sarah?" A voice behind me made me turn around. It was a young woman about my age, nervous but determined. "I'm Jennifer Santos. I received a foundation scholarship 10 years ago to study social work. I wanted to thank you for continuing Mrs. Whitmore's work." "What are you doing now, Jennifer?" "I run a community center in the Bronx. We provide after-school programs, job training, and family support services. Last year, we helped 800 families." She paused. "Mrs. Whitmore's scholarship didn't just pay for my education. It showed me that someone believed I was worth investing in. That belief changed everything about how I saw myself." Stories like Jennifer's had become the real measure of success for me. The foundation's financial reports showed impressive numbers, millions distributed in scholarships, grants, and loans. But the human impact was what mattered most. Robert Hartley approached as Jennifer walked away. "How are you feeling about everything, Sarah?" "Grateful. Overwhelmed sometimes, but grateful. Margaret would be proud of what you've accomplished." Over the past 6 months, I'd expanded the foundation's programs significantly. We'd added mentorship components to all scholarships, created small business incubators in underserved communities, and established emergency funds for families facing financial crises. The foundation was touching more lives than ever before. "Robert, can I ask you something I've been wondering about?" "Of course. Why didn't Margaret just leave her money to establish charities? Why create this elaborate plan with me?" Robert smiled. "Because she understood something about institutional charity that most people don't. Large organizations become bureaucratic. They lose sight of individual human stories in favor of statistics and efficiency. Margaret wanted her foundation to stay personal, to remember that every dollar represents a person with dreams and potential. And she thought I could do that? She knew you could, because you've lived those struggles, Sarah. You understand what it's like to have talent but no opportunities, to work multiple jobs while pursuing your dreams, to worry about rent while trying to build something meaningful." As the evening wound down, I found myself on the hotel's terrace, looking out at the city lights. New York looked different to me now, not just as a place where I struggled to survive, but as a place where I could make a real difference. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Watching the foundation's live stream from work. So proud of you, sweetheart." My mother had been able to reduce her hours at the hospital, though she'd refused to retire completely. "I'm a nurse," she'd said when I offered to support her financially. "People need me." But now she worked because she chose to, not because she had to, and the stress lines around her eyes had finally started to fade. I thought about the Whitmore family, most of whom were now facing various legal consequences for their conspiracy against Margaret. James had been sentenced to 2 years in prison for fraud. Patricia was paying massive fines and legal fees. Robert Jr. had fled to Switzerland to avoid prosecution. But I'd also learned something unexpected about forgiveness and family. Margaret's foundation files contained a letter she'd written but never sent, addressed to her nephew Michael, the only family member she hadn't mentioned in either will. I'd tracked Michael down and discovered he was a public school teacher in Boston, struggling to support his own family on a teacher's salary. He'd been estranged from the wealthy side of the family for years because he'd refused to participate in their schemes against Margaret. I tried to warn her, he'd told me when I called him. I told her that James and Patricia were planning something, but she just smiled and said she already knew. Michael had become my first ally within the Whitmore family. His daughter was now a foundation scholarship recipient, and he served on our education advisory board. Margaret had been right that family was about character, not blood, but sometimes you could find both in the same person. "Sarah?" A voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see Dr. Elizabeth Harrison, the psychiatrist who had evaluated Margaret's mental competency. "Dr. Harrison, thank you for coming tonight. I wouldn't have missed it. You know, I evaluated Margaret 4 times over 2 years, and she talked about you constantly during our sessions." "She did?" "She was so excited about your potential. She would show me the investigators' reports about your volunteer work, your kindness to strangers, your determination to build something meaningful despite your financial struggles. She said you reminded her of herself at your age. I wish I could have met her." "You did meet her, Sarah. You met her through every choice you made that impressed her. You met her through every act of kindness she witnessed. You met her through the person you became without knowing she was watching." Dr. Harrison handed me an envelope. "She left this for you, to be delivered on the Foundation's first anniversary. I think tonight is close enough. Inside was another letter in Margaret's elegant handwriting. My dear Sarah, if you're reading this, then a year has passed since you received my inheritance, and I hope you've begun to understand what I really left you. Yes, I left you money. But money was never the point. I left you purpose. I left you the opportunity to touch lives the way mine was touched when I was young and struggling. I left you a foundation. But more than that, I left you a community of people who believe in investing in others. I left you board members who will guide you, staff members who will support you, and scholarship recipients who will inspire you. Most importantly, I left you the knowledge that you have the power to change the world, one person at a time. I know this year has been difficult. I know you've faced challenges you never expected, responsibilities you never asked for, and attention you never wanted. But I also know you've discovered strength you didn't know you possessed. The foundation is yours now, Sarah. Not because of law or paperwork, but because you've earned it. You've proven that you're exactly the person I believed you to be. Use this gift wisely. Help people the way I tried to help people. And remember, the best way to honor my legacy is to live your own. With love and admiration, Margaret P.S. Check the Foundation's vault. There's one more surprise waiting for you. The next day, I went to the Foundation's offices in the Margaret Whitmore Building, formerly known as the Whitmore Building, until the family's criminal activities made the association embarrassing. Robert met me at the vault in the basement. Margaret left specific instructions that you were only to access this after reading her anniversary letter, he said, opening the heavy door. Inside was a small room I'd never seen before, filled with personal items that hadn't been part of the estate inventory. There were photo albums, journals, and boxes of letters. But in the center of the room was an easel with a painting covered by a cloth. I pulled away the cloth and gasped. It was a portrait of me, painted in exquisite detail, showing me volunteering at the animal shelter. The painting captured a moment I remembered, comforting a scared dog that had just been brought in from the streets. At the bottom of the painting was a small plaque. Sarah Chen, the granddaughter I never had, the daughter I always wanted, the person I knew you could become. I sat down in the chair facing the painting and cried, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. Margaret had seen something in me that I was still learning to see in myself. She'd believed in my potential when I didn't even know I had any. Looking at that painting, I understood the true nature of my inheritance. It wasn't the money, the properties, or even the foundation. It was the knowledge that someone had believed in me completely, unconditionally, and permanently. Margaret had given me more than financial security. She'd given me purpose, community, and the confidence to become the person she'd always known I could be. 6 months ago, I was Sarah Chen from Queens, struggling to pay rent and wondering if I'd ever amount to anything significant. Today, I was Sarah Chen, director of a foundation that had already changed hundreds of lives, with the resources and determination to change thousands more. The money had been life-changing, but the real inheritance was the understanding that I had the power to change other people's lives too. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. "Mom, want to help me plan next year's scholarship program?" "I thought you'd never ask," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Outside the vault, New York City hummed with the energy of 8 million people pursuing their dreams. Somewhere in that city were future scholarship recipients who didn't yet know their lives were about to change. Somewhere were young people with talent but no opportunities, working multiple jobs while trying to build something meaningful. Margaret had seen potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself. Now it was my turn to see potential in others and help them discover what they were capable of becoming. The true inheritance wasn't what Margaret had left me. It was what I could now leave for others. And that legacy would continue long after I was gone, touching lives I would never meet in ways I could never imagine, just as Margaret had always intended.